Great. Well, next time we do this, I'm going to request an hour to tell you about the awesome innovations that are coming out of the program. We'll actually have some slides with some videos from all the games being developed. But that's not why we're here right now. We're here to talk about you guys and these guys developing and evaluating great technologies that can be used in schools, but then also taking the next step. And that means disseminating the games to actual students and teachers in schools. That's half the battle. And then secondly, imagine having to sustain your game over time by generating revenue or coming up with some kind of model to keep it viable over time, and then also to continue pumping funding back in for further development, further evaluation, and just obviously whatever it costs to keep it going. So that's kind of a broad introduction for the session. Once again, I don't know if you'll come to a presentation without slides or without any video games being shown. I'm sorry about that. But hopefully these guys and their dynamic, charismatic personalities will overcome the lack of video. So once again, I'm Ed Metz, and I manage the EdIES SBIR program. And I gave out a one-page handout there and joked about being a government person who comes with paper. So I wanted you to also see what my life's like back in Washington with a lot of paper on my desk. And the SBIR program, if you don't know about it, I'm only going to talk about it for a minute here, but definitely dig in a little deeper on the website for more information or shoot me an email anytime. The program provides seed funding for the research, development, and evaluation of education technology products, including games, that help students learn or help teachers in classrooms. And the most interesting part of the program, perhaps, it's a government program that is interested in the commercialization of your games, the private sector commercialization. So a government program is funding for-profit startup entrepreneurial developers to build the next generation of technologies such as games that can really positively impact education. So part of the program, if it's to commercialize games, we ask the question, well, how are these guys going to do that with a 2.5-year project with $1,050,000 for the development? How are they going to actually get it out there? So some people think that the build it and they will come model works, put it on the App Store. Others know that maybe works sometimes, but rarely, so easily to generate revenue. So there are companies that are getting licensing agreements with publishers. There are others that are going door to door at schools. There are others that are forming stakeholder partnership groups that are looking to do this together in unison. So that's kind of, I think, what we're going to touch upon. We're going to look at some of the models that have been successful. We're going to talk about some of the initiatives that did not bear fruit. And then we're going to open it up for a discussion. So that's kind of the goal today. And then I didn't tell these guys yet, but at the end they're going to give one piece of advice from their experience. So this is a unique group here, 5 developers who all were federally funded they receive funding to develop the games, but at this point, to some extent, they're left on their own to commercialize because the government's funding doesn't continue forever. So I'm going to start with introductions. Over here, we have Tori Van Voorhis, who is the CEO and founder of Second Avenue Software, the developer of the award-winning Martha Madison science game, which my 10-year-old loves. Thank you. My 10-year-old's the beta tester for the Department of Education. She has a unique position. So in a prior life, Tori was a teacher at the grade school, middle school, and high school level. And she led business and innovation strategy at Xerox Corporation. And Tori received her undergraduate degree from Smith College and a master's degree from NYU. That's why I mentioned that. It's right in the heart here. So next we have John Krajewski from Strange Loop Games, also the founder and CEO. And John's developing a game called Eco. And Eco definitely has amazing graphics, and it's a virtual environment that you definitely want to check out those videos. I want a poster for my office so that I can show my colleagues what we're doing in this program. So John's been an industry-leading programmer for years, having developed games for Amplify Education. He developed a social mobile game called Scribblywits and the indie hit Vessel. And John formerly worked at Electronic Arts and holds a master's degree in computer science from the University of Washington. Or is it a master's degree? Or
bachelor's there.
Sorry about that. I was giving you more credit than you deserve. So Carpenter is a co-founder of Teachley, developer of mobile math game apps, including Animal Adventure, which won the prestigious 2014 Apple Design Award. Kara co-founded Teachley with fellow graduate students while getting her PhD in cognition and learning at Teachers College, Columbia University. Kara is also a former teacher and Peace Corps volunteer, so I like to throw that last piece in there. I think that's really cool. David Langendoen is the founder and president of Electric Funstuff and the developer of the award-winning Mission US game that's on in today's pamphlet. You'll see that Mission US is up for one of the awards. And David also is the co-founder and chief product officer of ThinkZone, a company that is trying to solve the commercialization or kind of get us over this commercialization hurdle from two sides. From the developer side of having a place to put the games, and from the user side, a place to go to meet the developers and get the games. So imagine if there was a marketplace where a teacher could find the games that work for that classroom. And over here, lastly, we have Jessica Berlinski, the Chief Impact Officer at Personalized Learning Games, a company that is commercializing games in the area of social and emotional development. Jessica has a strong background in commercializing technologies and formerly served as the managing director at Game Desk. Jessica also recently published a great blog on EdSurge entitled 3 Rookie Mistakes That EdTech Entrepreneurs Make. Definitely check that out. I read it this morning. A lot of great tips in there. Good writing there, Jess. So to start out here, I'm going to hand off the mic, starting with Tori. I've asked each of these developers to tell you in 3 or 4 minutes, if that's humanly possible, what one of the successful commercialization models that were used for the game, and then one initiative that maybe did not work out as well as was hoped. And I guess even before that, spend a minute, like you could talk about how much you've been able to disseminate the game and kind of where it's at in terms of market traction, if that works. Or if the game's not developed yet, you can talk about how you're setting the seeds. So 1 minute on that, if that's possible, and then a successful model that you've been able to kind of find your way forward, and then a challenge.
Okay, I think I have it.
Sorry.
So I'm going to talk to you about two very different games, one of which has been a great commercial success, and the other which is a runaway award-winning success, and we have phenomenal efficacy data. And we'll talk a little bit about the why behind each of those. So the first game that we developed, it's not really a game, it's called Voters Education. We did it for the 2012 presidential election, and I wanted it to put the power of the pundits, that magic wall on CNN, in the classroom for teachers. And we had over 1 million media impressions. We launched it in Edmodo, and it immediately took off like wildfire. And we just launched it again for 2016. And to commercialize that game, we had 3 or 4 different distribution channels. We leveraged social media and Google AdWords. And the first time around, it really took off. And we're getting really great traction this time around. And we have created channel relationships with a number of different distribution partners and are getting rave reviews for the application. It's a very finite nugget of content. It allows teachers to actually gamify the presidential election in their classroom. We had it on the Hill in December, and all the wonks were having a lot of fun gaming out what this next election could look like. And so there we followed a very traditional awareness consideration hit rate model where we were looking to make sure that we had the right amount of awareness using social media, using Google AdWords and all those sorts of things. To have consideration is this big problem ThinkZone is doing a great job with having a place where teachers can actually go and buy. And districts can go and buy, because you have a mediated purchase in education. You're designing for a student, a teacher has to want it, and a district has to approve it. So you're not just convincing one buyer, you're convincing three. And you have to actually have that conversation with all three purchasers at the end of the day. So we have distribution agreements with Clever, with Education Elements. And the other thing that we're doing this time around is we've actually decided not to go down the App Store path, which we went down before. And instead of giving up 30 points to Google Play or Apple, we're partnering with some nonprofits who share our mission to improve civics education with this game. And for every $1 of sale that we make of the game, we're giving 30 cents back to that nonprofit. So we're trying to do well by doing good. So stay tuned. The announcements about that will be coming out shortly. The other game that we've developed that I'm deeply passionate about, and I'm a wonk, Gov major at Smith, by the way. So I love the Voters Ed game, love it. Is Martha Madison, and it's a game that was designed to really engage girls and minorities in STEM. It was designed around collaborative problem solving. We have efficacy data that's off the charts. We have an entire patent pending data analytics collection and reporting platform, and kids will replay the game over and over and over again. And the problem that we've faced with the monetization of Martha hasn't been teacher response, it hasn't been student response. It's been twofold. One, it's been the distribution channel problem. And the other is technology. So when we did the first grant that we proposed for this, the Wii was a brand new platform. And over the intervening years, technology has shifted in the classroom, and we ended up opting for Unity for our development platform. But guess what? We've been through 4 generations of Edtech hardware in middle schools since we launched the first version. And so now we're actually pulling back, and we're going to be doing a WebGL version of the units so that we can actually deploy in classrooms, because we went through the PC, which is what we originally designed for, then everybody wanted to be on tablets, then everybody was going to be on Chromebooks, and people wanted controllers, they didn't want controllers, and it made it hard for people to adopt its scale. So you have to know your client, and you have to keep your eye on the external factors. And all of our pilot studies are growing great, and we're going to be relaunching an EXE version of it for consumer channels in the very near term, while simultaneously redeveloping it for the education market in a WebGL format for the 2017 year. So 2 different products, 2 very different deployment problems, but something to keep in mind. Did I do my assignment,
yeah,
Dr. Metz?
With Martha, what's your strategy? What's been your best strategy to get it into schools?
It's actually through teacher evangelists. So teachers discover from other teachers, and one of our teachers is actually coming with us to ISTE. So if any of you are going to be at ISTE, stop by our booth. We're going to be in the Innovation Pavilion, and one of our teacher adopters is going to be there. So social media is your friend, and getting teachers like Steve Isaacs, I saw him here. He's amazing at what he does in Twitter chats and things like that. Is a great way to get the word out. Teachers don't read email anymore. Don't even try. They don't buy apps on the App Store very much at all, because if you put in physics game in the search criteria, you get hundreds of thousands, and discoverability is a problem, hence ThinkZone. You just have to get teachers who are passionate about it to talk to other teachers. And of course, national conferences, and we blog. And we've worked with, the other thing I will say is that we had several license agreements pending with major publishers as we were developing this. And one of the publishers went bankrupt, and the other one has laid off several thousand people. And so the one word of caution I would give to people who are looking at going into the EdTech space is that you can't rely on the big 3 or big 4 publishers to be your distribution outlet. They're facing dramatic hurdles in terms of the disintermediation that's happening in their business model, and they have sales quotas that are tied to the products that they're building internally. And so it's very hard to rise to the top in that salesperson's bag and get the traction that you're going to need to monetize your product. So we invested a lot of time and money into those relationships, only to have them they just sort of frittered out because they were facing their own financial problems, not because of anything that we were doing. And we discovered that they didn't have the internal models to really support launching disruptive products. Their whole accounting systems are still tied to ISBNs. You all know what that means, right? They're tied to books. So it makes it tough for them.
Great. So that's about 10 years in 5 minutes, I guess.
Yeah.
So I think what's amazing about all these companies and developers are the years of doing something that's maybe even outside their day job. You know, they didn't go to school to be a business expert. So our previous speaker talked a lot about the mad scientist developer, who we all know and love. I wanted to see the business expert standing next to the mad scientist for that partnership. But Tori, all 5 individuals here managed to sort of juggle and do it all. So next is John from Strange Loop Games, and Eco is not yet commercially available, but John has started the process long ago, which we encourage all of our developers funded through the program to be thinking about commercialization even before writing the first proposal, before anything's developed. So John's going to talk about the first, 18 months of Eco and how much traction from the commercial vantage point he's already established, looking for the launch down the road.
Yeah, so we're working on Eco. We're kind of taking a unique approach because our background as a company is that we come from the commercial games industry, so entertainment games. I used to work at Electronic Arts. My partners are from the games industry. So that's really our expertise, is developing games, getting that engagement level. And that kind of makes us a little unique in the education space, and that's something we're really trying to take advantage of. So our approach for Eco is that we want to kind of target both those markets. We want this to be a game that's going to stand alone in the market. It's going to be, it's going to sell on Steam. We can crowdfund it. It's something that the regular consumer market is going to appeal to, and then use that to find its way into the classroom. So kind of connecting those two markets. So what we've done with Eco, shortly after we got the grant, we started our Kickstarter. So we did a Kickstarter for Eco back in September, and managed to raise $200K from that. And quickly after that, we put it up for early access. So the nice thing about games these days is that there's a huge group of people who are really interested in participating in the development of games. So you can put something up that's really early still, and they'll give you feedback. They'll participate in that. They'll become your promoters. So we've had a lot of success using Steam Greenlight and a Facebook group, Twitter group, TIG Source for indie games. There's all these different channels, and everything we do, we just put out on all these channels. We're continuously kind of like building our audience and our promoters. And that's kind of our approach, is that it's much more of a marathon than a sprint. Like kind of the old way of developing games is you make the game, you put it on a disc, you ship it, you have like a big marketing push at the end. But as a small studio, like first of all, we can't afford like a giant marketing pitch like a big studio is going to do. And second of all, there's a huge opportunity there for just engaging people the whole way through. Building people up, letting them in from the beginning, and they'll help you kind of move the needle as you go. So we've put it on our website, so we have people downloading. They're able to buy it now and get alpha access and get access to our chat rooms. We share the source code with people at a certain backer level. So all these kind of different programs and ways to involve people in the development has been super helpful. And our strategy is to basically continually have launches of the game. Like we have our Kickstarter, and that's a big, push, a lot of hype. We get coverage from press, and it's out there and it generates a lot of interest. And then we do our alpha release, which is also the same thing: more press, more people buying it. And then we do our, alpha 4, and then our beta, and then our Steam early access, and then finally the release. So we've got many launches in there, because every time you do a launch, there's so much value to something that people can't have, and that's kind of something you need to use. You have this next version, you're building up hype for it, you're getting interest in it, you're getting people talking about it, and kind of using that to your advantage, we found is really helpful. And these are all kind of game industry, especially indie game developer techniques. And our goal, and we've already seen some success with this for getting into the educational market, is that people discover it through this route and bring it into the classroom. So for example, during our Kickstarter, we had a number of teachers and students who funded us at a high enough tier that their school would get it for free, that they would get the game entirely. And students would actually petition their administrators in order to make this happen because they're so excited about the game, or teachers who are connected would find us and get the funding to support us in a Kickstarter. The game is still incredibly early, but we've got these people who are just so, captured by the vision of it. And it really helps you kind of see what it is you need to build as well. Besides the early revenue, you're getting that market validation. You're getting that feedback of okay, this is the product, what really resonates with them, what doesn't resonate with them. So you're not just going in blind. There's just so many different benefits to developing it this way. So we're hoping to have that kind of grassroots motion for getting this in the classrooms. I think one of the most telling examples we've seen is with Minecraft, which is not an educational game. It was never developed as an educational game, but it's the biggest thing in education now, which is bizarre. It's beat out all these games that were built specifically for education. And I think there's something to that. I think that idea of capturing the engagement, capturing people wanting to play this, they're really fascinated by it, and using that into education is one of the most powerful routes to go. So that's kind of the direction we're going.
Great. And I think a key point that John made was when he talked about a sales force. None of the developers or companies funded through the SBIR program have ever had a sales force as part of their company. That's just not part of the equation that a company could survive the cost of a sales force. So there has to be another method. And to Tori's point, the textbook publisher route, I haven't seen it, maybe a few cases here and there, but it hasn't come to fruition as a viable model at this point. Maybe there will be a different way for it to work in the future, but as of now, I haven't seen that work effectively for many of the companies. Okay, so Kara's apps have been have had significant download numbers in the program, and perhaps Kara will start with that.
We've had around 800,000 downloads, but most of those are actually, about 85% of those are school downloads, and so we're really hitting that sort of educational teacher love metric in a pretty strong way, but I would say the reason for that, listening to Richard Culata this morning talk about the Common Core as an opportunity for what you should be developing around. We started thinking through the ideas of our games based on the sort of the research that the Common Core is based on, but really trying to identify what are the things that are different about the Common Core. What are the things that are really difficult about the Common Core? And in mathematics specifically, a lot of it is around strategies, and a lot of it is around sort of these process standards of getting kids talking about their thinking. And so that is definitely was for us a big piece of why sort of we had that sort of strong user response. The big flop of that is, unfortunately, teachers, we love them, we are teachers, we're former teachers, they have so little power over real buying decisions in their schools. And that has been the big, for us, kind of aha moment of, hey, we're building this thing, we're building a lot of teacher love, teachers love what we're doing, but they are so far away from that wallet in terms of sustainable revenue sources. So knowing that, basically one of our sort of strategies has been to really think about the data from the gameplay. And you have the pain point for the teacher is engagement and, you know, deep learning experience. The pain point for the administrator is data and accountability. And so how can you kind of combine those two things together? And so our latest initiative is all around games, not tests, and how can we use the rich data that we can capture from our games and really translate that into insights for teachers, formative assessment data points around who's struggling in my class, who's mastered what specific, and this is deeper than just, you know, how are they doing on this standard level? It's how are they doing on this level that's like one layer below the standard that's teachable, right? So we've sort of broken apart all of the Common Core standards in K-5 mathematics into these teachable pieces and really thinking about, okay, how can we use this rich log file data from games to sort of build predictive analytics around what are kids ready for next. So this is our newest initiative. So we're sort of in the early stages of this. One of the things that these administrators, right, their pain point is what we have as game developers, it's not enough content. You can't just report on this tiny, tiny piece. And so a big element of this project is actually an iOS SDK to bring together not just our own games data, but data from other folks' games too, in a way that doesn't actually share personally identifiable student data. So it's 100% COPPA compliant and FERPA compliant. And so really being able to sort of start combining many games under one login and one reporting dashboard for teachers. So we'll see.
Great. So this is Teachley. I mean, it seems like the model there, the App Store got you some good traction. Oh yeah. But now you're like, okay, what's the next step? Because I mean, to me, 800,000, I would retire and do nothing else ever. But obviously, there's a need for. Yeah.
Well, I mean, with the data piece, there's this need for sort of recurring support, and those subscriptions are something that, you know, just in terms of the models. It makes most sense to have those subscriptions happen at a district or school building level. And then you get the buy-in and the rollout and the potential for really deep classroom integration. When you're having it happen school-wide or district-wide, you have professional development support. It's not just your early adopter teacher, you know, and there's one of them in every building, you know, that's not that many. How many? 100,000 K-12, it's closer to 60,000 elementary. You know, like that's not, one teacher per building is not really going to transform.
Great. Okay, David at Electric Funstuff with the Mission US American History Games, and they're available for free, right? Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting model there.
Yeah, it's great batting cleanup here because all these guys got in base ahead of me, and with great points. It's sort of changing what I was thinking of saying. But first I just want to say, like, Tori bringing up the technology, hidden bear trap. Like, no one thinks about it. Things are changing much faster than they used to. I will embarrassingly on video announce that 10 years ago when we were pitching Mission US to the Corporation of Public Broadcasting, which is the initial funder, we said, we're going to build it in Flash because it'll be future-proof. And times have changed. It's still working, and actually, it's despite Adobe renaming it Adobe Animate now. They've like stripped Flash out from the name. It's still an effective tool, but if clearly we're on the dying legs there. So how do we adjust to that? And Unity's going through its own problems, and HTML5 is going through its own problems, and the computers that schools have. Anyway, and then tablets and Chromebooks, blah blah. I thought John's point was really interesting about how he's trying to, and I think this is really necessary in your thinking, can you tap other markets besides education? Can you build a game that could potentially be sold on Steam or other outlets and actually stand on its own in that way? That's a really insightful thought. That's one direction to go. When Kara's talking about the teacher-administrator conundrum and how your users are not your buyers, that's a complicated thing. Maybe we'll talk more about Think Zone later and how we're trying to like get around that issue. For Electric Funstuff and Mission US, as I said, our initial grant was from Corporation of Public Broadcasting in partnership with WNET Channel 13 here in New York. And the stipulation of that grant, which was extremely generous, especially for middle school history, which is a very, not where you're going to get venture capital, it has to be free. And we're allowed to make a little revenue off the games we developed under that grant, but then there's a pretty big clawback provision after that. So even if we were able to monetize some aspects of it, after a certain point, I think they get 80% of the revenue. So there's a disincentive there. The beauty and wonder of Ed's program, and I cannot say this enough, is for the fifth game.
Department of Education, not my program.
It's Ed's program. Is that SBIR is designed for small businesses, and so the work that you do is you own, and you can, and they encourage you to commercialize and monetize it, so it gives you a real leg up. It's for an expensive content area game in social studies. Like I've bootstrapped it for 18 years now, but that would be a lot to do, like to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not $1 million, to make something like that without any known ROI necessarily, without a sales force, without a publisher, all those challenges there. We did talk to one of the textbook publishers at one point a few years ago. They wanted to make, I won't say which one, they wanted to make, and I thought this would have been a fantastic idea, they wanted to make a Mission US branded social studies textbook that would incorporate interactions and all this stuff. And we were all so excited. They were excited, we were excited, and then we ran into this, wasn't quite the ISBN problem, but it was close, which is those publishers work on print budgets. And when I said, oh yeah, we could do a bunch of small interactions, those would probably be about 10 or 15,000 each, and then these big cornerstone ones would be a few $100,000. They were like, pass. Because it was just, it was a very different experience. So so you try all these things, and I think you can get, every game, like every baby, is different. So you can give broad advice about it, but if you're going for like, pre-K or early elementary games, or if you're doing, elementary or middle school, each of these is totally different students, different markets, different subjects, different ways of purchasing processes, high school, and forget about higher ed. I mean, that is an entirely different beast altogether. We've worked in all these areas, and it's incredibly challenging to sort of figure out for a small company how to sell and market into those spaces. So it's just a big open question that the industry really needs to solve. But I'll wrap it up there so we can have more time.
You hit on many really great topics in many directions. So Jess, from personalized learning games is taking social emotional games to the market, and the games are ready to go, and you're launching them.
Yes. So personalized learning games launched their kind of signature game, which is called Zoo U, about a year ago. We did kind of a early adoption at the tail end of last year, and then our first official year was this school year. And the game, and this is an interesting niche. I mean, the different, our panel here is largely focused on, academic subjects, and social and emotional learning is a soft skill. But it's one that is gaining a lot of traction in the K-12 marketplace. So for us, what was very important was seeding the game. Kind of how we looked at this was, okay, let's start. And the game, I should take a step back and just describe what the game does. So it is a kind of a two-pronged game that both assesses a set of social and emotional skills, and then builds those skills through an adaptive technology. So there's like a whole host of ways that an educator or a counselor or a social worker or a school psych could use this potentially. And what was really important to us was to seed the game and get feedback from the marketplace. So how are folks on the ground using this? Why? And really importantly, and Carrie, you mentioned this, is what is the pain point that we're solving with this? Because educators, if you have the coolest game in the world, if you're not solving a pain point, if you're not taking a burden of an educator off their plate, then chances are they're not going to expend the time to use the game, even if it's, you know, the coolest thing out there. And so what we found was really interesting. We found, despite the game being used by whole classrooms that were very focused on social emotional learning, and that, you know, we're using this as a kind of, you know, practice kind of cool thing with their in-person work, what we really found, and we found this nationally, was that it was counselors who really had a pressing, desperate need for a tool for kids with identified skill deficits in these areas. So the kids, they're called kind of tier 2 kids, the kids that teachers will say, you know, you need to work with this child. Those were the ones that literally were like, thank you so much. I have nothing that can give me data on where this kid needs help, and then targets where this kid needs help and engages the child. Because a lot of these kids have, you know, issues with, you know, social initiation and social engagement, etc. So that was, and then that information then guides us to where we sell the tool. So that gave us the information to say, okay, let's focus on counselor conferences across the country. And it was, you know, a huge kind of pickup there, because again, we were finding that this need was really across the country, this pain point. So that's one of that was kind of our kind of guiding strategy. And it's interesting too, just to kind of take the flip side, the conversely, although, you know, counselors don't necessarily, as educators, don't have the purchase decision power, what we found in some cases did not work was when the administrator, like let's say the superintendent, there was one district in particular I can think of where he was like on board, wanted to do this top down, loved this tool, loved it for all students. When that decision came top down and educators in his district were actually kind of forced to do this, the perception, even though it was in many cases inaccurate, was like it became something they had to do. It wasn't something that was very natural and organic, that they could learn how this works for them and how cool it is and how their students are responding and then tell their peers. So that actually, you know, for us, I think it's that marriage of, you know, start with the users and then have that bubble up to the decision maker. Because when it's solely top down, you know, you're kind of fighting an uphill battle.
Great, thank you so much. So, how much time do we have? Does anybody know? That would help, sort of.
Unless they're going to cut it short.
It's 1 o'clock, so everybody's still hanging in there, I think. You don't look like you're withering away too much. I'm going to ask one question to the group, because I'm not sure how much time we have. And I think it's one we haven't really talked about too much. It's if you could talk about your kind of future steps talking to VCs and other private funders. I would imagine at some point everybody faces that question if you get far enough down the road of whether you need to have that conversation or not. So if you want to share an experience or thought, that'd be great for the group. Maybe my question didn't...
I can take a little bit of it. When we were pitching to VCs about building math games for kids, we got very little response and feedback. Versus, you know, we're pitching a formative assessment platform that's game-based and integrates a bunch of different people's games, and it's big data, and that's something that has definitely gotten a lot more interest. But a content game, it's, you know, you can, maybe you have the charisma and the, you know, confidence to pull that off, but like David was saying, it's hard to get a VC behind.
It's also hard just to get administrators interested in a single content area application. Like if you have a game or a few games, they actually don't care. I mean, they want their summative assessments, they want things all nicely packaged up, but they need a big enough purchase to make it worth their while. They need scope and scale to make it, I mean, they've got limited consideration time, so your game has to, or games ideally, covers a broad range of things. And we learned this from a survey we did for ThinkZone, but actually my colleague Dan White, who's leaning against the wall over there from Filament Games, who maybe will offer some additional insight, once told me that one of their things that they learned is administrators look at games as a sort of a equivalency of 21st century skills. So that what games can bring to the table, and so we've verified that independently as well as what Dan has said, that is a very more effective way to package your things, because they're looking for a checkbox there. They need ways, especially digital ways, and games are great, to see that their students are getting exposure to 21st century skills. So even though they might be content area in many ways, STEM, or in our case, social studies, can you find a way to get a skills alignment to those might be a more effective approach.
No,
Great.
first,
Do you want to?
Sure. So what we're finding in the K-12 market is that the questions that we're getting from VCs are all about traction. So, how deeply are you scaled? What are your numbers? Who's buying, et cetera? Interestingly enough, and conversely, prior to personalized learning games, I co-founded a company that also built and launched a social and emotional learning game for the consumer market, which is totally different marketplace. And, just to show kind of the contrast, no, we didn't have to have any traction, but this was with the founder. My co-founder was the former founder of Electronic Arts. So I think in that case, really hype was, we got $6.5 million from Greylock, which is a lot of money for a learning game with no traction. So it's different marketplaces, different questions, different amounts of money, frankly.
no, for Strange Loop, I don't think VC funding is necessarily something that we particularly want. I think there's other options that are probably better for us. And kind of the route we've taken is we have ECO, and we have our grant-funded project, and potentially more, which we're applying for, which are our property. We want to turn it into a platform. We want it to be a foundation for lots of experiences, kind of this digital field trip, basically, this virtual world that's alongside the classroom. And grants can fund a lot of that, and I think we can kind of start building the revenue up as well. But at the same time, rather than taking VC funding, we've also been doing contract work. We've been working with other partners who have approached us, or who we've found, who are taking on they're doing really interesting projects that they're looking for people to take a pretty leading role on these and have a big influence in the design. So they're good projects to do, and they bolster our portfolio. They help us get grants. So the two strategies, I think, really go together well. Whereas a VC, if you're taking funding from VC, you have to become a very specific kind of company that's going to hockey stick, right? And I don't think the education market does that very easily. It's a hard one to move. You can disrupt the regular, app store or whatever a lot easier than you can disrupt the educational market. That's going to take some time. And I'd much rather have our company have the flexibility to take that time if they need to, that the market's still emerging, and that we have time to kind of grow into that and start, being a little bit of ahead of the curve with these grants and things that can specifically want to push that, but not be forced to get 10x revenue in X years, right? That, I don't think that's necessarily right for educational tech companies. And there's been some, big flameouts from that happening of let's make this happen now. Let's get iPads in every classroom. And it's just a big explosion. I think it necessarily takes a little bit of time.
We actually did a strategic round of investment rather than a traditional VC round from an education institution that had an interest in our expertise, because a traditional VC has a fund with a horizon, and the Edtech market has been hot and cold, right? There have been a few great successes and probably more failures. So, there's different ways of doing funding. We do service work, we do grant work, and we did take in the outside funding. You might want to look, if you really are in need of capital, for a strategic partner or a strategic funder, but you have to make sure that your missions are very much aligned and that there is a marriage of the business models and the synergies between the skill sets to make that work in the long run. So, I feel like the company's 10 years old, and I still feel like we're a startup, even though we've been making payroll for 10 years. I keep expecting the other shoe to fall, but we're growing and we're thriving, and we've got really great relationships with our service clients as well as building these products. So as you're trying to scale, look at different sources of capital. SBIRs are great. Grants are great. Try and control your IP. Make sure that you file your copyrights and your patents so that you protect it. And then the only other thing that I'm going to say is free is not sustainable. Everybody wants everything in education to be free, and we've all said something about it here. Every platform changes, standards change, and you have to have a way of keeping your products alive in the marketplace over time so that you can continue to invest in them and so that they can continue to serve your student populations.
Great. So we have till 1:30, so 18 more minutes, and that was good information. I think one more point for me is the amazing kind of change in landscape. If we were having this conversation 10 years ago, we might have been talking about whether schools would even entertain games, not discussed now. And 10 years from now, it'll be interesting to see, what gets the game field over the hump in education, so to speak, and where we'll be. I think stating the obvious, it's kind of a new field in that sense. Okay, so let's open it up. Back there.
I'm trying to understand a little bit better the role of grant money and grant applications in the sort of product market fit search with product design that you guys do. And I guess my question is, are you thinking of organizations that give grants as a sort of customer who, like a customer, like a school system or a teacher whose needs are going to guide your product direction? Are the grant giving organizations in some ways, are you conceiving of them as guiding your direction as well?
That hasn't really been our experience. In our experience, the grant programs want you to be the person guiding it. They want you to have this vision. So it's much more about coming to them with, here's this risky idea that might be hard to pull off without grant funding. And they kind of, if you can bring them on board to that, versus them like, we had this agenda, we need people to fill it. Like, there may be grants like that, but not ones that we've worked with.
Yeah, they often identify sort of each year, depending on the agency. Department of Education is very different than NSF, which is different than NIH in terms of their needs, but they will often identify sort of, I'll just call it a hot area, that they're, something that they're particularly looking for, they're a priority area that they want submissions for. You don't have to meet those, but it's at your own peril. But to John's point, then my experience is once if you're aligned with one of those areas, usually you're pretty free to do. It might be different of like a philanthropic organization as opposed to a government SBIR grant, so it depends on the source of the funding, of course.
And there are a lot of challenges out there these days that are act as grants, and those would probably be very specific and targeted. So that great question. Back here.
So first I want to thank you because this couldn't have come at a better time for me. I'm an English teacher, and my buddy and I, our teacher, we made this game to help our kids with social emotional learning. And so we're kind of coming at it from this angle, the kids love it, we're getting a lot of traction in our own school and just districts that we had, let them play with it. And we even put in our SBIR grant in last week. And the whole time, we just had no idea what we were doing. The lexicon you guys are using, is limited to my watching of Silicon Valley on HBO. So my question to you guys is, as somebody who's in the classroom with kids every day, does this knowledge about seeding and venture and how to market and business, is this something that you guys just acquired over time? Is there somewhere that we can go to kind of fast track our own knowledge to avoid, some of the mistakes that we're probably making?
I'll jump in with one recommendation. I think that's a wonderful question. And, even as evidenced in all of our different stories, each one of us has such different experience and stories about what worked and what didn't. But one of the, it's a book actually that I found really helpful and actually referenced in the piece that Ed mentioned, the Ed Search piece I wrote is called the Lean Startup, which is Eric Ries. And that's not about games, it's about startups, but some of the principles there are guiding principles that are really applicable in any domain, in any tech domain. So that was something that actually the CEO of Personalized Learning Games had all of us read, and has been, I think, really instrumental.
The other thing that I would recommend is looking for an entrepreneurial hub in your area. So like I don't know what geography you're in, but there are a variety of hubs around the country that are focused on EdTech or that are focused on tech, and they'll have business people that are part of those hubs that can be there as and serve as coaches and mentors as you're growing your business.
And specifically in education, I think the customer discovery work, just Google customer discovery, I think is important because we are often in this area where the user and the customer are not the same person. And so having some sort of early understanding of that would have helped us probably a little bit.
No, what's been really great for us is just approaching people who have been there and know it. Like David, for example, was a great kind of mentor to us as we were getting started. He's quite a bit further along in his business, and
David.
Yeah, just ask him; he'll tell you what to do. But it was extremely helpful in like figuring out, how do we target these grants? What are they looking for? How do we shape what we want to do into that? So, I think you're in the right place, and I think there's like tons of people who'd be interested in helping you out. So
Great. So Richard Culata talked about the EdTech Developers Guide. It's a basic 101, 60-page document, but incredible resources in there. Incubators, accelerators. If that was the right fit for you, could be a place to get some nuts and bolts down as well. And then I'm a free service. You can email me. But yeah, forming your team would be the one thing so that you don't have to do everything. So to have some person be the one who's looking at the business models and the viability of your concept out of the gate would be great. Okay, we have time for a few more questions right here.
So I'm interested in panelists' thoughts on the difference between intrinsic motivation, possibly through play, and extrinsic motivators through gamification. Is there an opposition? Could those be described as two poles? And/or are they somehow complementary? And should we combine, or do you combine both strategies in game design in your own games?
Good question. We could do a whole panel just on that. I think, and this issue's been circulating around since I've been in the business, which was back in the 90s. The way I come down on it is I think both are important. The longer I've been in the business, the more I appreciate the value of intrinsic motivation, and ultimately that's where you have to get, because that is the internal fuel for any individual to keep going. But I do look at extrinsic motivation as sort of like an igniter of that. Sometimes a student is really struggling or really not interested in a subject. So how do games light a fire there? The game itself may need some extrinsic motivators in it to kind of get you through those first levels. I actually try to drop those off over time. So you kind of scaffold the experience, so maybe there's a little more up front, but you try to sort of let the intrinsic take over at some point from the extrinsic, which is, I don't know if it's an art or a science, but that's sort of our philosophy in approaching it. Because I think if you're all extrinsic all the time, you're not getting anywhere, I think, in the long run.
No, in our case, since we're targeting the regular consumer games market, like extrinsic isn't an option. There's no such thing. Like it has to be, they have to voluntarily want to play it, and they really have to want to play it because they're going to put down money for it. So I think coming from that angle, we try to make it purely intrinsic, and like the act of it being self-driven is such a key part of it. I think it needs to be thought about from the very concept that it is such an important part of the learning, in my opinion.
I would just add to that really thinking about what is the essential interaction that you're putting points or external, rewards around, and if that interaction is a video or a multiple choice question or, something lame, then that's what you really want to avoid. If you have a game that has at its interaction something that's fun and engaging and you have some sort of point system or other thing around that, then I think that's an okay use of the points.
Great, we're going to go with 3 more because here, and back there have been up for a long time. And then we're going to have to switch to the closing comments.
Hi, I'm Melinda from Malaysia. We've actually created a chemistry role-playing game. And my question is, we've tried the things that you talked about. On Kickstarter, we've got green light, and we've got 800 over media pickups because of the publicity that we did. But the game is not selling. So I don't know if you have any tips or strategies that might work. Yeah, we've got fantastic feedback from the industry about what we're doing, but it's not selling.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say what is that magic that will really make it sell. And there's something to be said for just fast fails. Like, not every idea is going to succeed. Like, you want to be able to prototype stuff and iterate on stuff, and being able to get that early is super valuable versus like building a product for 3 years and then finding that out. So, I mean, I would think of it as, an opportunity to like evolve and iterate the design and see, what directions really mesh with people and which ones didn't. And, maybe it's something that you can build into that. I mean, sometimes it's just a combination of getting the right marketing, building that over time. I think it's really got to be in concert with the core design of the game too. So
one of the things I've noticed, particularly in the K-12 market, is that if a teacher hears something once, it's like they don't even hear it. But if they hear it then from someone else who's also, wait, I thought I heard from that somewhere, and then if there's, one of the things we did, we had a number of different articles in ed outlets, and some of them by very kind of well-respected, leaders in the field of social emotional learning were writing about our game. And, people would, eventually kind of contact us and say, oh yeah, I heard your article after I heard it here, after I heard about your game here. So building up all these different, whether it's a conference here, an article placed here, just, spreading out all the different opportunities where someone could potentially hear about it, because it's not going to be the first time. It's going to be like the 5th time when someone says, wait a minute, like, what is this? I want to try it.
Absolutely, and you always have to make the decision based on your business model and your resources. To John's point, is this a fast fail and let's get out because we're not getting the traction we need fast enough? But it is a long haul industry. You have to be in it for the long haul. And sometimes you don't know if this is a sign that it's just not market compatible for whatever reasons, or you just haven't found the right pitch or the right customer yet, and maybe that'll happen in a year or 2 years or 5 years. How much do you believe in it? There's no unfortunately magic solutions there, and it's up to your commitment and how long you're willing to pursue that. Certainly from the games, this is not a get-rich market. I don't think any of us up here and here, the impacts most of us, I think, want to achieve is, reaching students and teachers and improving the quality of their education. And all we're hoping to do, most of us, I think, I mean, sure, it'd be nice to have a penthouse somewhere, but is just to, to keep getting enough money to keep doing the things we do, pay our staffs, and kind of keep rolling. So that's,
So your question, we should have asked that first, because that could have we would have had nothing else to talk about. So 1 minute for both of you, sorry.
I teach at a community college, and we talk about this, the digital gap, but there's a huge skills gap when you go on socioeconomics, and I'm interested in the socio-emo games, but the big gap that I see is the executive skills, and some sort of a feedback game to tell students and data analytics to show them that their behaviors are resulting in better results. Something as lame as an attendance app, but also more than that, more study, more group, more everything. Have you heard anything about executive skills games?
Well, it's sort of it's the non-cognition of which social emotional is a subset. So if we draw the Venn diagram, it's in there. That area is picking up a lot of publicity and traction these days. I think we're going to see a lot more in that area. I mean, geez, I think the New York Times had an editorial about it the other day. I think David Brooks wrote something about the need for non-cog experiences and more awareness of that. There are other sorts. I've seen a lot of challenges, like game design challenges in that space. So I think it's the early days and taking not only SEL but branching out into that bigger space.
Yeah, there was actually a report that was released recently. It was the Boston Consulting Group, and I forget, in concert with someone else, that literally kind of, and it got a lot of press coverage, that encouraged entrepreneurs to actually integrate, executive function, social emotional learning skills into all games, not just games focused on that, but math games, et cetera, really citing the importance of these skills for kind of the careers of the future, that it's going to be about collaborating, and it's going to be about our ability to, have empathy with people with other culture, from other cultures, because we're all interconnected now. So that's a fascinating and really interesting report, which I can kind of point you to that afterward. But as David said, I think we're going to see a real increase in this.
I know do check out John's game. I think he's on the John's game. Yeah, he's on the leading, if not bleeding edge, of trying to create like a multiplayer experience in an ecosystem that involves civics and communication and voting and doing all these things that really get at getting those students together.
Great. So, sorry, John.
That's all right.
I'm so sorry.
Give it a shout out. It's good.
You couldn't have said it any better, David.
Exactly.
So, hey, if you have a very, very quick question.
A strategic investor versus a financial investor. So traditional VCs are motivated by a return on assets that they place into a portfolio. There are limited partners that put money in, and it usually has a 5-year horizon. So early money in, you get a longer runway. Strategic partners are usually taking a portion of their free cash that they are looking to place to work outside of their core business for something that they want to grow. So it might be a large corporation that wants to do R&D, but they want to keep it outside of the main company, because when you try and do R&D inside a big company, sometimes it gets killed. In our case, it was an educational institution that was looking to improve student retention, student engagement, and student outcomes, and they'd seen the results of our data, so they were very interested in collaborating with us to create that next generation of experiences so that they could benefit from our knowledge.
Great. Okay, so we have 1 minute left. If everybody could give maybe one word of advice down the line in terms of commercialization. I don't know if that's humanly possible, but...
I'll start. And this might sound contradictory. Don't market and sell to teachers. I mean, it's not going to be, you might get a few sales, but the ROI is not going to be significant. You might get some, but it's probably not going to scale for you. But at the same time, design your games with the teacher in mind. Really have a role for them, have activities, lesson plans, or even a role in the game that they play some kind of person or character if it's multiplayer in that case, but include the teacher in the space. They don't want a game to take over their teaching. They want a tool that's going to get their students fired up, engaged, and excited, and they can take it from there. So that's
great. Perfect.
This has been said, but I'll just underscore, just listen to the user, and kind of build in or build your tool with agility, because when you start to get a tipping point and you're hearing the same thing again and again and again, you're going to want to tweak what you're doing, right, before you step on the gas and look to scale it. So again, that process of continually listening.
If you're in the early childhood or elementary math space, let's work together. We're working with ArtGig Studios as a really early partner in the sort of trying to replace these math assessments with games. So come and talk to me.
That's a great point. We're a really friendly industry. We all know each other. We help each other. This is not about like competition. Oh, you're going to steal my customers. We all just want to build the space together and make it thrive. Come talk to all of us.
I think our advice, not necessarily for every company, but connect it to other markets. and find ways so that the people that are using your product are engaged by it, and that has that intrinsic motivation, and they're driven to use it.
I would say play test early and often. We start with paper, and when we're doing any of our designs, we start with teachers and students at the table from the very beginning. So play test, usability test, efficacy test throughout your entire development cycle to make sure that you're hitting the needs and the pain points of your stakeholders and that they're having fun. We do a lot of engagement testing.
Great. Well, thank you guys. It was really great. Just the tip of the iceberg on this topic. So we'll try and do this one again for sure. Thank you.